Wow, what a great crowd for a Saturday afternoon. Is there something going on this weekend, maybe? Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Trey Grayson. I'm the director of the Institute of Politics, and I want to welcome you to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum at the Institute of Politics here at the Harvard Kennedy School. We especially want to welcome all the freshman parents today, this whole weekend. We just want you to know your students, your children have been studying every night, including the weekends. They're always in the library. There are reports about the libraries have never been this crowded before. The professors have never seen this much learning in the classroom before. And those of us involved with extracurriculars have never seen this much before. I think that's what Drew Faust told me to say. So we're excited to have all of you here. The forum is a place that a couple nights a week we have great conversations like today. And hopefully your children have been coming to those throughout the semester and will continue throughout their time here at Harvard. So we're going to begin with really quick introductions. We have more detailed intros in your programs here. Dive into a conversation, and then we'll invite all of you to join in with the questions from the 4 microphones that are here. So I want to begin, as I said, with quick introductions. Jonathan Alter is currently a columnist with Bloomberg View. Many of you know him from his commentary on NBC and NBC, as well as for many years he wrote a political column and reported in Newsweek. To his left, Carlos Diaz. Carlos is the Allston Burr Senior Tutor in Dunster House and is a lecturer in the government department and is teaching a very popular class this semester entitled The Road to the White House. Nina Easton is an Institute of Politics fellow. The fellows, we have about 6 or 7 each semester here at the IOP. They spend a semester here teaching a study group, which is a non-credit class discussion group on various topics. Nina is a columnist and senior editor for Fortune magazine. You've probably seen her on CNN and Fox doing political commentary. Just in the interest of disclosure, her husband is a senior Romney advisor, but she's very candid and very, just wanted to let you all know, so just, we're transparent here at Harvard. And then on the far left, which is not a normal position for him, Mark McKinnon, who was the chief media advisor to President Bush in 2000, 2004, and was also an advisor to Senator McCain in 2008. You've probably seen him a lot. He's on Morning Joe a lot right now on MSNBC. And is also an IOP fellow. So please join me in welcoming our panelists today. I thought I'd begin the conversation by asking Carlos, who's teaching the class that I referenced in the introduction, what does he hope the students will take from this class? As obviously it's well-timed with the presidential election taking place during the class. But let's begin with a little bit of an academic question before we get down to dirty into politics.
Thanks for the invite. I feel like Admiral Stockdale in the 92 debate when he said, what am I doing here with all these people who know so much about presidential campaigning than I do. The class, The Road to the White House, is a class that aims to get people excited about and get them to apply some of the theories that political scientists and other scholars have learned over the years about how campaigns work to the practice of a real campaign. So we use this 2012 cycle as a lab in which we explore a number of theories that we have learned over the past 50, 60 years about political campaigns. We begin by talking about the Founding Fathers and how the design of the institution leads to what we have now, and then we chronologically go from the invisible primary to the primaries and caucuses to the conventions, the selection of the vice presidential nominee, the debates, the role of the media, political consultants, all the way to the election. And then we'll look at why people vote, how they voted in this past election, and how they transition into office. So the main goal is to get people excited about how the process works and to get them to think about how the theory of campaigning for the presidency applies to the actual practice of campaigning.
Great. So all the freshmen are taking EC10s. You can take his class next year. And all the students who are in this class right now, they all get extra credit for coming here.
There we go.
Right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Jonathan, you wrote a book a few years ago in the first year of the Obama presidency, and you write regularly on politics commentary. What's the state of the race right now? We're about 3 weeks out from the election day. We've had a couple debates.
Well, it reminds me a little bit of when I was a sophomore at Harvard 36 years ago and spending a fair amount of time at the Institute of Politics, and it was the 1976 campaign. And Jimmy Carter in September, he was Democratic nominee, he wasn't president yet, governor of Georgia, had a big lead in September, and then President Gerald Ford began to close the gap. And it was just a question of whether there was going to be enough time by the end of the election for Ford to win. And it turned out there wasn't, and Carter won very narrowly. But Romney has some momentum now, and it's a question of whether President Obama can break that momentum next week and whether he can execute on the ground. Political campaigns, and I'm very anxious to read what you're assigning in your class because I need that help for my next book. But political campaigns are kind of like, the reason they're called campaigns is that word comes from warfare. And so in modern warfare, you have an air war and a ground war. And traditionally, whoever controls the air also can control the ground, but there are a lot of exceptions to that in battle. In this campaign right now, there's an enormous air onslaught by Mitt Romney and the super PACs working on his behalf. They are just firebombing these battleground states. You cannot turn on the television without seeing a pro-Romney ad. But the president, in large part because he's been raising so much money online, raised $181 million in September. So he's fairly competitive in the air, and on the ground he has a big advantage. He controls the ground, mostly because the super PAC money is no good on the ground. You can't buy somebody doing persuasion. If they call up at a phone bank and they're paid, they're reading from a script, nobody's listening. If they're an enthusiastic Obama volunteer on the other side, they can keep people from switching away from Obama or do some of what's called persuasion. So Obama has huge advantages on the ground, but none of that will matter unless he can break Romney's momentum.
Mark, you were involved with President Bush's campaign and you were dealt with a lot of areas, but the air war was, I guess, one of your specialties as the media advisor. And another year that we sometimes hear is analogous to this race is 2004, which is one of the years you were involved with. But what's your take? What's the state of the race and what to expect?
Well, there's a lot of parallels to both the 2000 and 2004 race. Let me just comment on one thing that Jonathan said. He's right. There is a heavy air war going on right now, primarily by Romney and the super PACs, which was a strategic consideration. There were stark and clear strategies that were differentiated between the Obama campaign and the Romney campaign. Obama spent a lot of money early, very early, which is what we did in 2004, in an effort to try and characterize Romney on their terms. But Romney now has a lot of resources left for the end to try and shape the race at the end. The interesting parallels are, for me, really relative to the debate, which has been so instrumental in changing the dynamic. In 2000, the Bush campaign, before last week, all the criticism of the Romney campaign rang really familiar to me because I remember in 2000, in September, we called that month Black September in the Bush campaign because same thing happened to us. We had what we thought was a good convention, then Gore had an even better convention, stepped on our bounce. Suddenly, we had a series of sort of bad logistical and strategic things happen to us in September. And at the end of September, early October, we were down 3 to 5 points in all the polls, and everybody said it was a miserable campaign. We should all be fired. And then we went into the debates. And over the course of those debates, George Bush was perceived to have won the debates, and we flipped that around, and the next thing we know, we're 3 points up. And I think that Mitt Romney turned in one of the best presidential debate performances that I've ever seen, and dramatically reshaped the race. Now, I think the last debate's a good example where, most people look at political debates and generally fall into partisan camps about their evaluation of the debate. Their guy won and the other team lost, right? It's pretty dramatic if you support somebody and say the other guy won, which is what happened in that first debate. I mean, it was a landslide victory for Mitt Romney, and I think that in large part what happened is that a lot of people had heard and read a lot about Mitt Romney, but they hadn't really seen him, and this is something that, by the way, I've watched Mitt Romney for a long time, and one of the things that he has really done is work really hard to become one of the best debaters in politics. I remember in 2008, he wasn't that good, but it's something that he put a lot of time and effort into on his own, and I know Nina's husband and others who've worked with him. I mean, they really take this seriously and took it seriously, and the president obviously didn't. That's the other parallel I'm familiar with, because I remember in 2004, when we went into the first debate with John Kerry, there's an incumbent president condition, which is you don't want to be there. You've been president for 4 years. You're not used to sharing the stage with anybody or having anybody argue with you. You know, you're not happy about having to be out there, and also you have to sit there and defend a record of 4 years over the course of an hour and a half. And so I remember John Kerry decisively beat George Bush, and I still feel the bruises from that one, but that's precisely what happened in that debate.
He picked up 8 points, right?
Yeah, I mean, a huge net shift. That's pretty dramatic. Mm-hmm. So debates are, I say that there are 3 times in a presidential campaign where you can dramatically affect the numbers: your announcement, your convention speech, and your choice of VP, and then the debates. But the debates more so than anything, because this is a time when you're unfiltered, it's not controlled, and people get to see how you really do on your feet. So I think next week's debate, I think there may be more people watching the second debate than there were the first. I mean, there's huge high drama for next week's debate. And if Mitt Romney has another great performance and can maintain the momentum, I think this could go right down to the wire. On the other hand, I think the bar is pretty low for the president. I think if he just shows up with a little bit of energy, that he can probably rebalance this race.
One of the biggest issue, without question, and everybody kind of agrees on this in the presidential race, is the economy. And both candidates have been talking about who's got the best vision or plan for the next 4 years. And Nina, by writing for Fortune magazine, and not only covers politics, but covers a lot about economic policy and its impact in the political world. So Nina, why don't you talk a little bit about the role the economy has played to date in the campaign so far? Because right after that debate, we had a good jobs number that came out and helped the president out a little bit.
Well, and I also wanted to mention, Mark and I here do study groups with undergraduates, and we're each assigned 6 liaisons, typically from sophomores. And I have to say, these kids are tremendous. I mean, we know they're smart and talented, and I think what we've both been in awe of is just how sweet and grounded and enthusiastic they are. It's been a real treat. And I run a once-a-week study group on looking through the economy, looking at the election through the lens of the economy. And I've brought in speakers like Greg Mankiw, the economics professor, Bill McInturff, the pollster, is coming next week. We've got Larry Summers coming in the day of the election. So it's a really exciting opportunity for kids. I encourage all the undergrads to get involved and look at IOP, because it's a really
what
great,
days
exciting
since
place.
you're doing a commercial, it's what, Tuesday?
Sorry.
Tuesday at 4?
Mine is Tuesdays, 4 to 5:30.
And Mark?
Wednesday, 4 to 5.
All right.
And tell about yours briefly.
Well, thank you. Mine is on the theme of political disruption. We have a paralyzed political system, so I'm looking at the movements and people who are trying to move in, through, and around the system. The Tea Party, Occupy Wall Street, No Labels, a group I helped found, campaign finance reform, and other movements that are trying to shake up the system.
So in answer to your question, 2 things. One is on the state of the race question. I think Jonathan's right on the ground game in particular, that Obama's got a great ground game going. I think what Romney has going in his favor is an enthusiasm gap. If you look at the voters, that the more likely they are to vote, the gap starts widening with Romney's lead widening. The Real Clear Politics average, I think Romney's up by 1. Bush was up by 2 at this time last year. And Obama was ahead of McCain by 7 points at this time last year. And in terms of the economy, I find a couple interesting things. One is that, as pundits like to say, that no president's been reelected with 8% plus unemployment since the Great Depression. But what's become clear, and just leaving aside last week's numbers, what's become clear is that it's a much more complicated equation this time around. And I would argue that, and this is what brings up that whole 47% foible, that one of the fallouts, the almost ironic fallouts of a troubled economy, is that people are more and more concerned about the social safety net. And whether you're looking at unemployment insurance, which people are relying on, disability insurance, which a lot of studies are showing has actually become a replacement for job income for a lot of people, So you look at those sorts of safety nets, food stamps are up and so on. But even if you look at Medicare and Social Security, people are more nervous about any kind of change or perceived change in that. And of course, that's what the Romney-Ryan ticket embodies. So I think that there's that fear factor. I always say that fear is a great motivator in politics. I think what George W. Bush had going in for him in 2004 was fear about a terrorist attack. And I think that played to his benefit, having another terrorist attack. And I think now fear about this, so that you have this people fearful about one segment of the population, fearful about growth, wanting private sector growth, and then you have another segment of the population that's very fearful about losing whatever benefits they might have. And then the other kind of irony is that a couple of the swing states, the growth has been uneven, and it's actually, a couple of the swing states have actually done better than the national average, and they have Republican governors. So that makes it harder for the Romney-Ryan ticket to make their case that the economy is not on the rebound. So those are two thoughts on
especially Ohio.
Ohio,
Yeah.
and Virginia would be the other one.
Ohio is just critical. If Romney can't carry Ohio, it's very hard to see how he gets to 270 electoral votes. He can technically do it, but it's an extraordinarily steep climb. To mix a metaphor, he'd have to have a kind of a royal flush in all the other battleground states to win the election. So unemployment in Ohio is 7.2%. And the auto rescue, which the president mentioned only in passing, astonishingly enough, only in passing in that first debate, will absolutely come up in this next debate because it's popular in Ohio, and you'll see Mitt Romney try to say, oh no, I was for the same thing, and the president say, oh no, you weren't. And that debate will play out inevitably next week, don't you think?
Yeah, no question. How long has it been since a Republican president was elected and not carry Ohio?
Ever?
Maybe ever. Yeah.
I mean, I think Carlos. I mean, I think at least 1960, if not before. I think it's
not
ever.
in any recent history, that's for sure.
I think it's ever.
And to Jonathan's point, that gap began to look really problematic a few weeks ago, and I think for reasons that Jonathan touched on, particularly the auto bailout issue, because there's so many manufacturers that are related to the car industry that are in Ohio. So I think that was a factor. But again, I've been surprised by the extent to which a 7 or 8 or 9 point gap has suddenly been erased pretty much by the debates, and now it's a 1 or 2 point race in Ohio again.
Well, let me ask this about the debates. I've been on a couple panels the last couple weeks, and one of the things that some other folks have made some points, and they persuaded me that there's some value with this, is that given all the noise, all the TV ads, all the nonstop news coverage, that the debates have actually been elevated in importance because they're the only 90 minutes where you just have the candidates, and even the role of the moderators sort of step back and let them go at it. What do you all think about that thesis?
I totally agree with that. I was mentioning that to you a couple days ago,
Yeah.
that for all of the talk and the hand-wringing about all the money being spent on both sides, by the way, that I think, if you've traveled to any of those states recently, it's a complete blur. People complain about it. And ironically, the debates are what have come to help shape the race. It's not the moneyed ads.
Amazing. There were 70 million people watching the first presidential debate, which was, I think, 15 million more than watched Obama and McCain.
Yeah, that's the biggest number since 1992 for a presidential debate.
And to just emphasize the point, I've studied presidential advertising over years and how it's evolved and modulated over time, and markets sort of get used to seeing certain approaches and themes, and the market evolves. But the one thing that I think has really happened in modern American politics more than anything in recent years is that voters have become incredibly cynical and skeptical, and they're cynical about what they see from the campaigns. They just assume that political advertising is lying to them. And so there's a huge emphasis now on authenticity. If there's a way to communicate something authentically because it's just perceived as being much more credible, it's not packaged and controlled by the campaigns, and that's what you get in a debate. It's not packaged, it's not controlled, it's the candidates there by themselves, and they're out of the noise.
This goes to what I think is one of his big problems. And his calling card is authenticity. And he will not do anything that he thinks erodes the fact that he's not, a big phony. And that's why he thinks he's even in this race to begin with, given how bad the economy has been. But he feels like he has to be an actor in the debates. And so he's kind of trapped between wanting to be authentic and knowing that he has to make these concessions to the process in the form of snappy one-liners, and a kind of a forced enthusiasm, when what he really is interested in is being president. But what he forgets is you have to be good at the artifice of politics to get reelected, and so he's struggling with this now, and I think he will do what it takes, but he's also going to be very careful not to do anything that he thinks is phony.
I think that's very good observation.
Before we open up to questions, let me ask Carlos. You've been here on campus for a few years. How do the students' engagement level with this election, maybe compared to the last couple of years? Well, I've only been the director here. This is now into my second year, so I can't compare it to 2008. But you've been here for a while. What have you seen as the ebbs and flows?
Enrollment is up by about 100, so that's good. In terms of, so I require the students to watch the debates, right? And what you said is exactly right. After the first debate, I asked, are there any independents who changed, and now do you lean towards the governor or the president as a result of the debate? Almost all of them now lean towards Governor Romney. And I asked how many Democrats are now less energized. A lot of Democrats raised their hand. And about 70% of the students felt that the governor had won the debate, even though we have about a 2-to-1 Democratic advantage. So I think there's a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm. But there was a lot in 2008, right? The first time in their generation that we've had two non-incumbents running for office, first African-American running for the presidency. So there was a lot of energy back then. I would say it's
not as much this time,
slightly less, but I think the debates really energized the Republicans, and we'll see what happens next Tuesday.
Did it scare the Democrats into wanting to work harder?
I think it did. One student mentioned that she's a Democrat and she really will vote for the president, but she was deflated by his performance.
She probably was inflated, though, by the vice president's performance.
And so
that's something I heard in the hallways on Friday around the school.
And so I asked the same question after the debate, and almost all of them felt that the vice president had won.
Yeah. All the Democrats?
All of them. No, even some Republicans. Interesting,
okay.
I get them to use an app that they download, and they get to in real time say they agree or disagree with the statements, and we'll have the little charts.
Oh, cool. Just like the CNN thing.
Exactly. They don't get to see it live. I get the reports the next morning. And after the first presidential debate, most of the students agreed with the substance of what the president was saying. And they disagreed with the governor a lot more, but they felt the governor had won, which suggests that they're paying attention and that they're being objective to a certain extent.
That's what all the polls showed.
That's right.
Good. All right, now's the time we want to bring all of you into the conversation. So there are 4 microphones in the audience, and we have 3 rules for our questions here in the forum. The first is you identify yourself. And affiliation. So in this case, if you're a parent, tell us where you're from. And the third is a question. It's not a speech. Questions end in a question mark. They aren't too long. And just to let you know, whenever anybody speaks here, whether it's on a panel or in a speech, no matter how important they are or think they are, they have to take questions from the audience. It's one of our ironclad rules here in the forum. We're really proud of it. So we're going to begin right over here.
Hi, Mark Tomizawa, also a member of No Labels. I was there at the founding and really enjoy it, and I've seen you with your cowboy hat on at one of these events on campus. I want to make that clear. There was enormous brain drain as the baby boomers go out, which means there's an enormous amount of procedural knowledge lost in every industry and on campuses. And yet the people we haven't found a way to use communications to get the brains back in the room. So if you look at it, we're not marrying up senior citizens who know how healthcare works and who know how it worked before computers and before there were live TV screens. So while these discussions are really important, on TV at least, they turn into inside baseball. And the people really know how to make things work again are never, suited up on camera being asked. Now, if we take them and marry them up with young students, you get something interesting. You get reverse brain drain, and you get people who know how to spread the word quickly and easily. And you could argue that right now we're going through a capacity issue in America, right? That leaders, hang on, this is 5 years of work.
I know, but I wanted you to be a good first example for everybody, since you're
Okay, so I'll now ask the question. Would you welcome Americans of all ages suggesting solutions instead of voting for the options that have been put before them? And if you do welcome that, what sign would you want before the election even happens that we can re-engage the American people in solving problems?
To pick on Carlos as Jonathan, and let Carlos, you come in on this one too.
Go ahead, Carlos. You can take it.
No, I was picking on him. I think you wanted to volunteer. He's more than happy to have
I just think that social networking is doing a lot of what you're suggesting, and that older people can also get into social networking. It's much more interactive. I've covered every presidential election since 1980, and it used to be a kind of a one-way conversation. It would be me blabbing on TV or writing a Newsweek column, and other people either, in the privacy of their home, or maybe with red typewriter ribbons. Remember those that sort of really over-caffeinated people might send letters on red typewriter ribbons. But other than that, we didn't hear back from anybody, And now it is a totally interactive national conversation. And the ideas about how to make change or how to reform the system are percolating up through the process all the time. Are they all absorbed by the candidates and used politically? Of course not, because a lot of them don't work politically, and they do what works, not what might sound nice at Harvard. But what is happening is that kind of national conversation that I think the founders envisioned is increasingly taking place.
I think that's right, and I think at the end of the day, I think our system works. It's not perfect, but it works. We elect people to represent us, and whether you have a trustee model in which you entrust in them the responsibility to decide for you, or you believe that they need to represent you, at the end of the process, at the end of the cycle, 4 years for the presidency, you go and you vote. I think it works pretty well. If we don't like what the guy has done, we kick him out. If we like what he has done, we give him another chance, or we give his party another chance. So I do think that even though we're getting closer to that idea, I think the system works for the most part, and even if the voices are not all heard equally loudly, they're heard. There's so many ways in which regular citizens can express their opinions and can connect and can get politicians to pay attention.
Where it's not working is on the money part, which maybe
That's right.
others want to talk about.
That's right.
I think that what's happening is that I would disagree a bit and say that it's really not working very well. The system is paralyzed by hyperpartisanship, and that and one of the things that I'm encouraged by here, by people like you and others, is that although they're losing faith in the conventional institutions of government and parties, they're finding new and different ways and channels through NGOs, through entrepreneurial efforts, through engaging maybe older Americans, and we need to do a better job of that. But there's fascinating things going on as those sorts of people and organizations are finding new ways to go around the traditional system, because the traditional system just isn't working.
And I'm okay with partisanship as long as partisanship means that people have deeply held beliefs and they stick to those beliefs, right? The problem with partisanship as we have it now is that people are not talking to one another, and they'd rather not do anything rather than come to the table and come up with a solution that is not ideal to either one of them, but it's better than no solution at all.
Let's go to this microphone right here. Yeah, come on up.
My name is Greg Stone. My daughter is a freshman here, and I'm an alum. I graduated. DR was president.
You look great.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'm only 39.
Yeah.
But seriously, what do you folks think about the vice president's smirks or giggles, depending on your point of view, during the debate, other than the fact that his teeth were so obviously artificial? He has a great dentist, but do you think that made him look stronger or undermined his dignity?
I've liked Joe Biden in the past, and I was really turned off by it And I found, it's interesting when we talk about Republican-Democrat gap, I found a gender gap, and I don't know if the polls are showing this yet, but Governor Doyle, who's here, IOP fellow here, Democrat, loved Joe Biden. His wife was appalled and just, thought it was awful. I was surprised that it wasn't more of a deal breaker than it was perceived as.
To be true, and the polls aren't out yet on that debate. If that anecdotal evidence proves to be true, that's a real problem for the Democrats because they're sinking right now among women, and they have to have a big gender gap to win this election. I thought he was, I responded positively to it. I like seeing these guys mix it up. I don't like seeing them, pretend to be nice to each other. I like the old-fashioned rough and tumble of politics, which used to be much rougher back 100 years ago. I thought that even though a Republican consultant named Mark Salter, who these guys know, tweeted in the middle of that debate, the Democrats are sleepy cop and crystal meth cop. If Romney violated his Mormon doctrine and had 3 cups of coffee before his debate, Joe Biden had 9 cups of coffee before his debate.
But I think
it was good for partisans. The Democrats had to have this. They were so demoralized that if Biden had come out there and not delivered an extraordinarily over-the-top partisan performance, they would have not had the enthusiasm they needed.
Rough and tumble is one thing. Sneering and condescending is to me, a totally different ballgame, and I've never seen a politician behave with that level of snarkiness, condescension, and the cap teeth. We won't get into
Mark's dying to get in
this
here.
is where I think context is really important because I remember very well the first debate with Al Gore, where if you grade that on points, Gore won, right? And remember, in the next 24 hours, the conventional wisdom changed, and suddenly Bush won, as a large part because of the stylistic things that happened.
What was the phrase you guys used? You said it this last week in the form, sighing and lying. That was your spin, right? Sighing and lying?
Sighing and lying, yeah. That's right, because he had this sort of condescending, he was harumphing into the microphone, that sort of thing. Now, when I look at the Biden performance, it was actually like 3 times what Gore did. Mm-hmm. But because of the Obama performance, Jonathan's exactly right. I mean, it was put in the context. They needed somebody with some energy back up there to sort of re-energize the base, and that's what he did. He came in tough, and that was his game plan. And my view was that it was important for Paul Ryan to meet the vice presidential threshold, which I think he did, and maintain the momentum for Romney, which I think he did. Biden's role was to stop the bleeding, which he did. So I said it was that Ryan held serve, and Biden went and threw his racket and screamed at the rest, which is what his job was.
We also haven't seen Saturday Night Live's interpretation of this either, so we'll have to see where I know we're all waiting until 11:30 tonight to see that. Carlos,
if the purpose of the debate was to energize the base, the Democrat, I think you're absolutely right? But I thought it was incredibly dismissive, and I expected the vice president to be the senior statesman in the room, right? He's 27 years older. He is the sitting vice president, and I found him to be dismissive and way too aggressive, and I think it's going to be a big problem with women and independents. If you look at the CNN tracking poll they had of the agrees and disagrees, women were consistently higher on Paul Ryan, which is not what you would expect. But I thought it was very disruptive.
Just so we're clear, we don't know yet. So Matt Dowd, who worked with Mark and was Bush's pollster, saw some data that he tweeted that said that in some early surveys, Biden had done much better with independents. So this will all play out. It won't determine the race.
Yeah, and they're vice presidents, too.
It never actually determines the race. But I do think that the 2004 campaign is relevant here because, as Mark mentioned, John Kerry beat President Bush, went up by 8 points, and then the next debate was Cheney versus John Edwards. And Cheney, as we all know, likability is not exactly his strong suit, right? But what he did was he drove the Republican national security message that year, which is Bush and I will keep you safe. And he drove that message in that debate. And even though he wasn't likable and was Darth Vader or whatever they call him, he helped to tee up the next debate for Bush to make a bit of a comeback. So even if, and especially Republicans, found Biden to be very off-putting, it does tee it up in message terms a little bit for the president. In his debate, the president reminded me of what Abba Eban, the late foreign minister of Israel, used to say about the Palestinians. They never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. So, you know, the president just was so slow off the mark that all of these soft pitches would come over the plate and he wouldn't even swing at them. And Biden swung at all of them and he hit a lot of them on their key messages. Maybe might have turned off women stylistically, but on abortion, he was scoring. He was scoring on Medicare. He was scoring on the Republican argument that we're makers versus takers with the 47%. On issue after issue, Biden was driving the Democrats' message, which teed it up pretty well for the president.
I was just going to make one other quick, just to pick up on Trey's point about Saturday Night Live. This is really important. I think there's this echo chamber effect of these moments in the media, and you don't know how they're going to play out.
Right.
So, you don't know how this is going to play out on late-night comedy shows. And the example of that is the Clint Eastwood moment in the convention, where that came out, and it was everybody said it was a disaster, all the pundits on TV. And next thing you know, there's a counter-rebellion of bloggers. There's people in Northern Virginia putting empty stools in their front yard. The Smithsonian is calling the campaign and wanting the stool for their Americana museum. And it's the cover of The New Yorker as, the empty stool as the symbol of Obama at the first debate. So it's come all the way around. And, again, the media, particularly comedy, acts as an unpredictable echo chamber in all of this.
Yeah. I think the 04 comparison is a really good one. But I think the main difference is that what people talked about after the 04 vice presidential debate is the substance of the message, right? Cheney reinforced the idea that they keep us safe, right? What we're talking about here is the laughing, the smirking, the style. And so I think that takes away from the Obama-Biden message a lot more than it should have. Because now we're talking about this as opposed to the substance.
Is there a question at this microphone? Anybody saying it? Okay, we'll come down to the floor.
Hi, my name is Dan.
So somebody who's in line might want to go to one of the other mics. So, sorry.
My name is Dan Wallenstein. I'm the proud parent of a freshman and also a senior here, and I live across the river in Jamaica Plain. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming and giving your perspective. Since you all seem to agree that a lot of electorates sort of turn off or are cynical about what comes out of the campaign, and therefore the debates have risen in their value. What can we do, or not me, but what can the media do? What can maybe even the structure of the debates be changed to so that the integrity and the accountability of the debates themselves rise also, so that a candidate can't just get there and, since this is the believable moment, say almost anything they want, even if it's in contradiction to what they've said before, and that sort of goes relatively unchallenged until you turn off if you turn off the TV and the fact check afterwards saying, no, that wasn't right. How do we raise that during the debate itself, or how does the media raise itself to do a better job?
More Martha Raditz's. I thought she did an outstanding job. She did, this is about journalism, about getting the right kind of moderator who's holding the candidates accountable and asking good questions. In 1986, I came here to the Institute of Politics. I was asked to be part of a committee to make recommendations on what the structure of debates should be. At that time, the parties had overrun the League of Women Voters that used to sponsor the debates in the 1984 negotiations. And so Newton Minow, who had been head of, was a fellow, and he had been head of the FCC under Kennedy, and was actually the father of debates. He had proposed them when he was working for Adlai Stevenson in the 50s. So he convened a panel of people from the parties, a few journalists and others, and we came up with these recommendations, and out of this meeting here was created the Commission on Presidential Debates, which I think by and large have worked pretty well, but they can't work every time. It depends partly on whether the moderator is on his game. It depends on the luck of the draw in terms of the questions at the town hall forum. Maybe they should get rid of the town hall forum. All of these things need to be reevaluated from time to time. But one of the wild cards about next week is that because it's a town hall forum, part of the content of the debate will depend on which questions people in the audience happen to ask. And it's a reasonable thing to wonder whether presidential elections should possibly turn on the serendipity of who asks what question at a presidential debate. But then you have to ask, is that better than negative ads determining presidential election, or Sheldon Adelson's $100 million determining a presidential election?
I just want to win this.
Well, I concur. In fact, I spent last year at another institute here at the JFK School doing research in a paper on the notion of whether or not there should be similar reforms in the primary debate. So I think that there's a lot that can be done differently, although I think that the last debate was a pretty good one, the Raddatz debate. So yes, I think absolutely reforms should and will be considered.
Great. Okay, thanks. We'll come back over to the front.
Hi, my name is Jorge Suarez. My daughter's a freshman here. I am from Mexico, but I live in New York. My question is, why do you think that, despite demographics, immigration has not shown up as a topic in either the presidential or vice presidential debate?
Well, Jim Lehrer didn't bring it up. I mean, it was, to me, that was just a mistake on his part. He needed to make sure that the 4 or 5 big issues were covered in that first presidential debate. And I guess Martha Raddatz could have brought it up, but it's really a question for the presidential candidates primarily. I would be amazed if it doesn't come up in the next 2 debates. It's a huge issue.
It's a huge issue, but it's not a winning issue for either one of the candidates, right? One doesn't have a particularly good track record with the Latino community on that issue, and the other one doesn't want to alienate his base with that issue. So I think it will come up, but it's not one that they're going to dwell on too much, I don't think.
Great, thanks. Up here.
Hello, my name is Barbara Steger. I'm from one of the swing states of Colorado. I have a son who's a freshman here this year. Thank you very much for this opportunity. This is a wonderful forum. During the debate that occurred out at Denver University, they interviewed a lot of the undecided voters. And people were saying over and over again that they are fiscally conservative, but socially liberal. And I'm seeing, at least my perception is that I'm seeing some of the Republican candidates trying to fill that gap and appeal to that type of voter. I'm wondering if you're seeing that same perception. And also, I'm wondering why I perceive the Democrats being very liberally, fiscally liberal and liberal in their social viewpoints. I'm wondering why they don't try to swing to accommodate some of these voters and try to draw those voters in.
Yeah, well,
It sounds like a Mark question right off the bat.
You're right. In fact, arguably that's where most, or certainly a great share of Americans are, but because of the way our primary systems work these days, that have become more and more base-driven for reasons that we could talk for a long time about, the nominees for the parties make an appeal to the base. One side is on the sort of fiscally conservative side, and the other side on the social liberal side. But that's why you see them generally drift more in that direction in the general election, although the dynamics now are different than it's been in the past, and that's why you're seeing a bit of a later modulation on the part of Romney. But that's why I think that there is great potential in the future for a third party. I mean, if we continue along this route where both parties sort of go to the extreme, there's going to be room in the middle for a candidacy that is just, as you describe, ideologically, fiscally conservative and socially liberal. There's a lot of people out there like that. I'm certainly one of them. Describe myself as a progressive Republican, but that's a pretty lonely caucus these days. So,
well, I think that the big thing we haven't discussed from the debates is that Mitt Romney was galloping to the middle. He had described himself as a, quote, severe conservative during the primaries. In that first debate, he was moving sharply to the middle, and then he just gave an interview to a Des Moines, Iowa newspaper in which he said that he wouldn't introduce any anti-abortion legislation, which is totally at odds with what he was saying during the primaries, where he was willing to sign a constitutional amendment banning abortion, pledged to appoint justices who would overturn Roe v. Wade. And remember, we're only one 79-year-old Supreme Court Justice, Ginsburg, who had pancreatic cancer, one justice away from a repeal of Roe versus Wade. So this is something that has been, it's become almost like people in politics are sort of tired of this issue because they don't like to deal with it. It's not what they're interested in. Voters are tired of it in a lot of ways, too. We've elected 2 presidents who were pro-life, 3, if you include George H.W. Bush, who made a change there, who were pro-life, and it hasn't led to the repeal of Roe versus Wade. So people assume, oh, well, that's not going to happen. It's been this way for 40 years. And it's a little bit like the boy who cried wolf when those who are pro-choice say, the wolf actually is at the door this time, and there actually will be a change in Roe versus Wade if you look at the composition of the Supreme Court. And people go, yeah. So part of Obama's task is to explain to people not just that Romney is flip-flopping and moving, but that the stakes in this election, not just on abortion, but on other issues, are very big for people who support certain progressive ideas and don't want them reversed.
Back down to the floor. Yes.
Hi, my name is Charlie Wu, and I live in Newton, Mass., which is a suburb west of here. I'm a graduate from the college and the business school of several decades ago. I have 2 questions. One for the faculty members, and that is, when I was here, Harvard was very liberal, perceived to be very liberal, very democratic, and it still is, okay.
That's an easy one.
I'm curious to know, though, my question for you faculty members is, have you seen a change in the attitudes of the student body? Has it become, well, I won't use pejorative terms, but has it evolved from several years ago? And my question for the practitioners is, and I don't know if you're allowed to do this, but if you're a betting person, if you're forced to make a prediction today, who do you think is going to win?
I would just say I had the Harvard Kennedy School. These are graduate students, of course, but the Harvard Kennedy School now has a conservative caucus. And I had them over to my 2-bedroom apartment, and they all fit quite nicely. I have to say, they were an awesome bunch, though. They were really thoughtful. They've now launched a conservative website here, just a couple days old, and they're trying to fill it up. So there's activity and thought and movement at the Kennedy School level, and undergrads. I don't know.
I'll take a stab at that one because I was class of '94, and now I've been back now for a couple of years. And one thing that's interesting is the Harvard Republican Club was actually the first college Republican club in the country. So it strikes me. We didn't survey as well then as we do now. I get the sense that the campuses might be a little bit more liberal. The student body might be a little bit more liberal now than it was when I was a student here. That being said, one of the things that I've noticed among the conservatives, and I see actually one of them who fits this category, hey Sarah, is that Sarah's a conservative, but Sarah's more of a libertarian. And I've noticed among the conservatives on campus a rise in libertarianism as a more, I wouldn't say dominant strain, but a more common strain than 20 years ago. And even among the Republicans, some of this, like for example, on homosexual issues and marriage and anti-discrimination laws and things like that, the conservatives, the Republicans, not all of them, but tend to be a little bit more liberal on those issues, not necessarily abortion, but on those issues than maybe was the case. Well, obviously than 20 years ago, but then you might expect at another campus. And so there is this sort of umbrella of what the right or the conservatives mean to people on campus. And so there's some thoughts that I've seen.
I was on the Harvard Crimson with Grover Norquist. Let me leave it at that.
Yeah. Carlos, what do you?
I haven't seen a big change over the past 10 years. I think it's much more liberal, obviously. The conservatives are very passionate about what their views, but it's still a fairly liberal
Yeah.
campus. They're very thoughtful, though, both on the right and the left. And in this class, I've seen they have an ad. They have to produce an ad for Monday and run a paper that justifies. And they're pretty thoughtful about what they do. And on the left, on the right, they take their views pretty seriously.
So, yeah, Mark, and then I'm going to I did not forget the second part of your question. I'm going to make him answer.
I was going to go to the second part of the
Go
question.
to the second part of the question.
Let me briefly address the first one, which is that as a Bush Republican here, I feel a bit like a unicorn. You know, people, oh, there's one, and they want to pet you. You know, it's like, but want to keep you caged too. But I will also say that in my experience, this is my third visit, that they have been very welcoming and encourage not only myself but to find other Republicans to bring here in an effort to be very, very balanced in sort of the presentation and the fellows. As somebody who spent a lot of time at the horse track, I'll take the odds on Romney. Because, I mean, if I didn't have odds, maybe not, but if I want to make some money, I'll bet Romney, because I'd get good odds on that today. And I mean, the important thing is in any election, and this is what you really want to look at the last couple of weeks, is which way the trend lines are going. And, so if you find somewhere to put your money down, look at those trend lines the last couple of weeks.
Now, for the good of Nina's marriage, you can punt on this one.
I'm not going to punt. I'll say what I think. Like, I have my own views, by the way. Just,
I know you do, but I didn't know if this puts you in a tough
I know
spot.
people forget that, but I think the momentum's with Romney. I wanted to also make the point, though, about the students here, and sorry to keep raving about your children, but
They like hearing it. It's okay.
I've just found them. We're each assigned 6 liaisons, which are undergraduates, where you become your team. So I have Team Easton, and I have one staunch conservative, a Romney volunteer, and then a couple kind of independents and a couple strong liberals. And they are so polite and thoughtful and not confrontational. Like when we had Greg Mankiw in, now he's the economics professor, he's an advisor to Romney. Occupy Wall Street organized a walkout of his class, 50 of the 500 students or whatever it is, 300 students last fall. So I had expected when he came in that there would be kind of some really rough grilling. Not at all. Yeah. And he said to me afterwards, Nina, you have to understand that Harvard students are really polite. Even the protesters were polite and apologized to me afterwards. So,
John, you want to weigh in on the horse race? Or not, the horse race.
Well, I think it's like trying to predict where the stock market is going to be, so I'm much more comfortable talking about the past or, Franklin Roosevelt. I was putting the odds for a long time when people were thinking that Obama was going to win. I said, no, it's 50-50. This is when InTrade had it, 70-30. And then in early September, I went up to, 70% chance Obama. And now I'm down to around 55% maybe Obama. So it really could go either way.
Political scientists are notorious for being wrong about their predictions, but I think this is going to be in which both candidates will be in the 200-plus electoral votes, and I would give it to Romney.
Okay.
Somebody pointed out that you could have made a lot of money a year ago by betting on a Republican president and a Democratic Senate.
Yeah.
Nobody would have predicted that a year ago.
This is a very realistic possibility. We've got time for one question. I'm going to take moderator's privilege and call on Sarah, because I want a student to ask a question.
Oh, thank you very much. And for giving away my political persuasion already. But, and I also want to compliment you on your lovely scarf. I'm a fan. So yes, I am an undergraduate, and I was wondering, something I noticed in the vice presidential debate that I'd like you to comment on that I think Biden really hit well, a sort of, for lack of a better word, Twitterizing of debates where people encapsulate, they sort of have a catchphrase that people really catch on to, like 47%, or I guess Big Bird, malarkey, thank you. People sort of gather around these catchphrases, and I'm wondering two things. Firstly, if politicians are cognizant of this and using that, and also if this is a fundamentally new phenomenon. I mean, we did have sort of Reagan's "there you go again," or if it's just not a new phenomenon, but just becoming sort of facilitated by the internet?
Great question. Yeah.
So this is something that I'm almost a broken record on this subject, and I can see my wife and my daughter, who's a freshman, over there going, he's going to talk about Obama's allergy to sound bites again, you know. So sound bites, which is, you know, or Twitter bites, whatever you want to call them, are not new. So they go back, you know, arguably to Jesus Christ, you know, who talked in these kinds of bites. Abraham Lincoln, when he said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand," that's almost a perfect soundbite. It's not. It's even under 40 characters. Right? So, this is the way effective politicians have always communicated. People are busy. They don't pay much attention to politics, and if you can't create shorthand or sound bites or whatever you want to call it, it is very hard to break through. Now, President Obama has had a few that he reluctantly adopted during the last campaign. Yes, we can. Change we can believe in. Those were adopted over his objections because for whatever reason, he considers it to be somehow too much of a concession to our, you know, Madison Avenue culture or whatever to use slogans and sound bites. And so he does it very reluctantly, very occasionally. He had, I thought, a very good one in early 2009. He gave a speech called The New Foundation speech, where he talked about how his vision was to build a new foundation for the country with investments in education, infrastructure, and the rest. And he stopped using it because some people were critical, like Doris Kearns Goodwin said, well, that sounds like a girdle, you know? So everybody might have their issues with various sound bites. Some people might not like malarkey. They might think it was disrespectful. The point is, politicians, if they want to communicate, they have to stick with their sound bites, use them to break through and persuade voters. So you're onto an extraordinarily important point.
Mark, and then
well, I think that while Jonathan's right that, you know, things haven't changed much since Jesus, on the other hand, our media environment and landscape has changed pretty dramatically. For example, in 1968, when Richard Nixon ran for president, the average time that he'd get on television when he'd do a press conference or a speech was 47 seconds. In the last campaign with Obama and McCain, the average amount of time was 7 seconds. So that's the conversation that we have as consultants with people running for office, and you're saying, okay, governor, senator, you're going to do a press conference on your energy proposal, and by the way, you need to articulate the core of your message in 7 seconds, because that's all you're going to get on TV. And the response is usually, well, that's ridiculous. This is a very complicated subject. I'm a very smart person, and I'm not going to dumb it down like that. And as an example, that's what President Clinton said to an old friend of mine and colleague named Paul Begala in 1992 when they were prepping for his debate. And they had asked him a question about the balanced budget amendment, and 25 minutes later, Paul said, Governor, you don't have 25 minutes, you have 3. And Clinton said, well, that's a very complicated subject, Paul. and that kind of went back and forth, and Clinton said, well, you know, show me an example of articulating such a complicated issue in the way that you're describing. And Paul used to carry around a small pocket-sized Bible, and he pulled it out, he opened it up to John 3:16, handed it to Clinton and said, read that, Governor. Clinton read it. Paul clocked him and said, there, Governor. In 6.8 seconds, St. John listed all the essential elements of Christianity. And Clinton said, okay, I got it.
Nina, you wanted to say?
Well, I was just going to...
It's hard to follow Mark.
Yeah, I know. That's a great story. I thought you were going somewhere else with that question, but so I'll get on my soapbox. I actually think that Twitterization of political reporting has been incredibly destructive and has led, in this year in particular, to really superficial political reporting. We mutual friend Jonathan Rausch, I have to admit my bias. He once said, tweeting is not an adult sport. And so I've sort of subscribed to that, although I do tweet sometimes. But I think by definition, if reporters are tweeting their way through debates or speeches or events, they're not covering it. And I think, and if they're spending their time tweeting and trying to out-snark each other, which is what a lot of them do, that there's less time and thought left to do more serious, in-depth reporting. And I think it perpetuates, it echoes the trivial, or it amplifies the trivial, and it makes snarkiness sort of, it amplifies snarkiness. And I think so I think it's been a very destructive force in the political coverage.
I think it's right, but the media has forced candidates to speak in those brief sound bites. And if you want to get a great account of how the media covers political campaigns and why they're covering the horse race, Professor Patterson's book, Out of Order, is a great place to start.
Can I rebut for 1 second, because I think this
Sure.
is so important. So Bill Clinton learned the lesson that Paul Begala taught him, and that helped him a lot in his re-election. So instead of going into a 25-minute answer on affirmative action, he says, I think we should mend it, don't end it. You know? What else do you need to know? I mean, there's a lot else you need to know, but as a way of communicating, that was very effective.
Well,
Same thing with, I'm going to build a bridge to the 21st century. I mean, people got really tired of hearing that. His aides are, oh my God, he's talking about the bridge again.
You said it
But
22 times in one.
Mark
right,
showed
but
that in a study group
he
this
got
week.
the point. He got the point through that he was a transitional figure to the new century, which helped him win that election.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know we could go on a lot longer. We're going to have a lot more questions because obviously the presidential election is a fairly important topic. But we're really glad to have everybody here. For the students who are here, we want you to come back. We're going to have debate watching parties for the next 2 debates, as well as a couple other forums that are on the back of your program. For all the parents, especially the ones who don't live in Newton and some of the nearby spots who can come to the forum, hint, hint, you can tune in live and watch all these online. We stream all the forums live. We archive them on YouTube, iTunes U, on our own website. When we had the president of Argentina here a couple weeks ago, 20,000 people watched our stream live. So we want you to be able to participate and enjoy some of these activities. So please join me in thanking our panel for today. And have a great rest of your weekend.
So to formally make introductions, I'm Nancy Coletta.
From Coletta's Restaurant?
Actually, it's my kid's father's family.
Where are we meeting?